Hey everyone, welcome back. Week 3, homework, Greek. All right, so I'm going to show you a few things that should shortcut some of these processes for you. What I really wanted you to do is get into Logos, start poking around and see some of the things it can do. So judging by some of the ways that some of you responded, many of you counted the number of occurrences that you saw of the word once you highlighted it using the visual filter, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but if you're just looking for a quick answer, let me show you this. I actually wanted you to kind of go through and count them if you could, because I wanted you to see, actually look at them with your eyes. But if you actually need that information quickly, you can go ahead and go to the search bar. I've already got Romans 1 opened here with the visual filter applied. Make sure that you've selected morph here, and that you've selected all morph text, and then Romans 1. And if you haven't created that filter, you can just do that by entering it in here, and you can create a new range. You should have already done that though. And then you just do the same thing you did to set the visual filter at, and then your noun nominative, hit enter. And if Logos decides it's not tired, not sure if you can see it. It's on the very edge of the pane here, so let me kind of move it over. If you look all the way over to the right of the search bar, it tells you 21. So you can just do that for each of the different kinds of nouns, and it will tell you the number. Okay, but let's get into the actual interesting stuff that I had you doing. All right, so the first question I asked you, the second nominative noun in the passage is servant. What kind of nominative is it? This is a predicate. I'm sorry. No, it's not a predicate nominative. This is the nominative that simply renames or re-identifies the previous nominative. So this is said to be in apposition. So this is a nominative in apposition. Paul, a servant. It's just another noun that can be attributed to the first nominative. Okay. The second question that I asked you here, what is the first genitive noun in both Romans 1:17 and 1:18? And of course the answer is God. And then what type of genitive nouns are they? Now the most common answer and the easiest one would be possessive, but if you've read a few of my comments that I posted here and there, you might now know that I don't necessarily ascribe to that opinion. Righteousness is an active noun, and we'll get to this a little bit later when we talk about the word study practice that I had you engaging in. And therefore, I would want this to be either an objective or subjective genitive, and given the context, I don't think it's the righteous acts that somehow we perform for God or that are displayed for God, but rather the righteousness that is displayed by God. One of the main reasons I think that is because it's a parallel construction with what comes right below it in wrath of God, where that is clearly a subjective genitive. This is the wrath of God is something God shows, not something God has. He doesn't have wrath, he demonstrates wrath. He doesn't have righteousness, he demonstrates righteousness. Okay, so I would argue that those are both subjective genitives. But I'm also willing to hear out any arguments you might have to the contrary. Okay, the next question. Look at the only dative noun in Romans 1:18. What type of dative noun is it? So let's go to Romans 1:18 and take a look. All right, so the only dative noun that we have here is unrighteousness. And there, I hope you can see a fairly clear indicator as to how this is functioning, who by their unrighteousness, by is telling you there that this is functioning as an instrumental dative. it is who by means of their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Okay? All right, next question. Look at the only genitive noun in Romans 1:26. What type of genitive noun is it? Let's head back to Romans 1:26. And the only genitive noun is dishonorable. And what you should notice immediately with your English sensibilities is that this seems like it's functioning like an adjective. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Passions is the noun and dishonorable is describing it. However, this is in fact in Greek a genitive noun, and it is functioning descriptively or almost adjectively, because you can do that in Greek. So the translators have decided to translate this as dishonorable passions, but you should note that you could also translate this to say, for this reason God gave them up to passions of dishonor. Okay, the translators have decided to turn that into an English adjective. So this is just one of the ways in which you can make yourself aware of some of the different things that translators are doing behind the scenes to help you make sense of the text that may or may not be warranted, and you may need to evaluate to some extent. All right, jumping into the next question, look at the two accusative nouns in Romans 1:5. What type of accusative nouns are they? Now, this is a bit of a trick question because I told you when you see two accusatives right next to each other that they're going to be a double accusative. These two accusatives are not right next to each other. They are separated with an and. They are both direct objects. We have received grace, we have received apostleship. We have received grace and apostleship. They don't have a double accusative relationship because they're not altering each other. They're just acting as two direct objects of the same verb. Okay? So always let your intuition and sensibilities guide you in this. If you can't make any sense of it, don't try to make sense of it. Let it be what it is. Okay? All right, so with that, let's jump into this final bit. So I've already pulled open the word study, and the first question that I've asked you is to look at the occurrence graph, and in what book does this occur most often, and that should be fairly easy for you. Let me switch to that pane. You see that big spike, and you can just hover right over it. Romans, 33 times. Okay, so we are in Romans, and this word occurs most often in Romans. This is probably a pretty important word in Romans, right? So it's not just arbitrary that I've chosen this word for you to look at. I have chosen an important word to Paul in this book, and an important theological term in the entirety of Scripture, both First and New Testaments. Okay. So then the second question I ask you is to go down to the senses tab or section. And actually mine now only has 4 different senses, so apparently they've changed something since I updated my Logos. And then I asked you how you would define this. Now, they've already done it for you. They've categorized it for you, and that's fine. But this is the point where, as graduate students, I want you to be thinking about how you critically engage with a given interpretation. Okay, so here we have 4 different senses: righteousness, and then they tell you that the sense is like a state of being is the idea. Righteousness as a characteristic or a character trait. Righteousness as a standard by which other people are held. And justice as a quality, which really is just analogous with righteousness as a character. It's just using a different noun to translate it, so they separate it into a different category. I'm not so sure that you can create a hard and fast idea of this time it means righteousness, this time it means justice. I think this is God's righteous justice in the context of his covenant faithfulness. I think that's the general idea behind the term dikaiosune, or righteousness in Greek. But if you click on the different drop downs here, you will see that they have already decided that Romans 1:17 fits in this idea of righteousness as a state, therefore leading us to the idea that, in fact, this is God's righteousness. This is something that he owns. It is a state of being that belongs to him or to God. And as I've said before, I think that there's more to it than that, especially given the parallel phrase of "for the wrath of God is being revealed" that comes almost directly after it in the next sentence. How is God's righteousness being revealed? From faithfulness, for faithfulness. For the righteous one will live by faithfulness. How is the wrath of God being revealed? It's being revealed on all unrighteousness. In other words, all those who exhibit that kind of behavior. And so that's why I would argue that, in fact, you're dealing with a subjective genitive in this case, and therefore I would categorize it more, let me close this drop down, as a characteristic of God that is demonstrated by God, and particularly for Paul in this context, by his Son, Jesus. This is how we know what righteousness looks like, and what God's covenant faithfulness looks like to Israel and to the world, which is the primary argument that Paul is trying to make to the Roman Church. So, few things that I want you to be thinking about here as you prepare to write your proposals for your projects. Notice how I chose this word. If you have a passage that you are looking to examine, I would like you to pull open the occurrences of the word that you're looking at and see if it's even an important word in the context of the book that you're studying, because that's going to have import into whether or not it's worth looking at, and into your overall interpretation, because you may be looking at more than just the particular passage that you're focusing on and trying to pull in all the different ways that that word influences that book, and trying to show how this particular passage plays into that overall process by the author. So I want you to be thinking big and then figure out, or thinking narrow as in what passage you want to look at, but then broadening your scope to determine what's important enough to focus on in the context of the whole book. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that a word that doesn't occur very often isn't important in the context of a particular passage, but then at least you'll know where to look to get a better holistic definition of that word as you study it, or phrase. All right, so if you have any questions, make sure you email me, text me, or call me, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And I hope this was a helpful review. I look forward to reading your proposals this weekend.